Hello everyone, bringing you a video today looking at this. Now we're looking at more East German kit here. This is a mannequin set up to represent a member of the Kampfgruppen Der Arbeiterklasse, circa 1973. Now Kampfgruppen Der Arbeiterklasse translates pretty literally as battle groups of the working class, and it was the East German workers' militia. And the kit they had was in part designed for their own use and in part the sort of hand-me-downs from the MVA, the National Volksarmy, the East German army. So we'll start at the top as we normally do with these and talk about the helmet here. We have the M56 helmet. This was the standard East German helmet. It would be modified. This has the earlier pattern of liner which is riveted in place. Later on these would be modified with the later pattern liner, but these were standard issue for the Kampfgruppen by this point. The uniform itself is a Kampfgruppen issue item. This pattern is a later pattern of uniform introduced in the early 1970s. The earliest photographs I've seen of these is the leader of the Kampfgruppen at the anniversary of the building of the Berlin Wall, the 10-year anniversary. So these first appear around that time, and of course there would be a transition period between this and the earlier patterns of uniform which have been in use prior to that. But in 1973 there is footage showing that this uniform was certainly in use, and there are photographs showing it was in use as well. So that's what we've got here on the mannequin, and obviously we'll have a look at this in more detail as we move the mannequin around. Have two breast pockets here. It's very similar to the combat uniform introduced for the MVA, but made in this grey material rather than the strict tan or flacken tan camouflage being used by the MVA. At the collar here, you can see the collar open here. There's a civilian shirt here, basically a polo shirt. Footage and photographs showing the Kampfgruppen on exercise in the field often show civilian shirts worn underneath the combat uniform. On parade and so forth, you'd have a white shirt and red tie, but in the field it's not uncommon to see civilian clothing worn underneath, which is what we have here. The equipment is hand-me-down elements of MVA gear. We have here the nylon waist belt with the grey painted buckle. By the 1970s, it's very common to see the Kampfgruppen have been provided with this stuff. Prior to this, they were using their own type of leather equipment, but by the 1970s, or certainly by the early 1970s, you're seeing increasing use being made of the MVA's nylon equipment. You have an early set of the suspenders here, which adjust with a toothed buckle. As you can see here, there are notches in the nylon strap here, and that's how you adjust the hook up and down, which hooks into a belt loop on this side and hooks into the back of the ammunition pouch there. This is a relatively early design of strict-tan ammunition pouch. This holds 4 magazines when fully loaded, and it has a ring on the back, a D-ring on the back, which hooks directly into the suspenders to support the pouch directly. This would be from the 1960s, and the MVA were moving on to more up-to-date, more modern designs, which were slightly modified from this. Another feature of the design is you have rivets in the top here, where the straps for the quick release are attached. That's something that would disappear from the design. So this is an older design of MVA ammunition pouch, which has been handed down to the Kampfgruppen for use when wearing full sets of equipment like we have here. On the hip here, we'll see more detail of this moving around, but you can see the strap coming around the front here for a Soviet designed respirator or haversack or gas mask bag carried around on the hip here. You can also see hanging free, we have the straps here that would be used to carry the pack on the back, not in use here, so they're just dangling free at the front. So that's the front of the mannequin. We'll start moving this around now and have a look at some of the other details. Looking at the right side of the mannequin here, you can see the ammunition pouch again, as I say, supported directly by the suspenders, slightly curved in order to take the AKM magazines. And I say AKM, AKMs were provided as aid by the Soviets to the Kampfgruppen, so they did actually use Soviet manufactured AKMs to some degree. They did use East German produced equivalents as well, of course, but we have the curved magazine pouch there, and as I say, this is a 4-cell pouch. It will hold 4 magazines when fully loaded. We have the arm of the jacket here, the combat jacket coming down here. You can see here we have a button pocket on the arm with 2 exposed buttons. Later on in the 80s, production would be changed to a version which concealed these buttons underneath the flap of the pocket, but here they're exposed on the 70s example. We also have a button cuff here. You can see this as a simple tab, and then you have 2 buttons, but you actually have multiple holes where you can fit these buttons. They're simply fitted using rings, as you can see here, and they can be moved using these different holes to provide different levels of adjustment for the cuff. So you have quite a bit of range of adjustment there for the cuffs. If we lift the arm out of the way now, I can show you at the back here, or round on the hip rather, We have the entrenching tool, which is a simple small shovel. This pattern essentially dating back in essence to before the First World War in German service, a very common thing to see in continental European armies and still in use by the MVA in the early 1970s, although folding designs were being introduced. This is carried in a brown leather cover. This is a carryover from the preceding brown leather Kampfgruppen equipment, still elements of that showing up in use in the early 1970s. Looking at the back of the equipment here and starting at the top, we have the protective cloak. Now this is part of the NBC, or nuclear, biological and chemical in Western terms at the time, or British terms at the time, protective clothing, so protection from, the intention of this is to provide protection potentially from biological, chemical and nuclear agents. This is a simple garment that unrolls and can be buttoned around the body. It does have arms, it can be buttoned around the legs, and it can be combined with protective overboots and protective gloves to provide an overall protection for the body. It also has a hood which can be pulled up over the helmet and around the gas mask or respirator to provide overall protection for the body. This particular design was introduced around 1961. It was being phased out of service in the MVA, but still very common for use by the Kampfgruppen. It was basically their standard protective clothing at this time in the early 1970s. And as I say, it could be combined with gloves and overboots to provide overall protection for the body. That's clipped up to the back of the suspenders here. You can see using the clips, which were really intended for carrying the pack on the back, but they've been used to attach the rings from this cloak on the back here in this instance. An item you might see rolled up and strapped to the back of the belt is the Zeltplan or shelter half. These of course could be used as an improvised waterproof, a ground sheet, or for building a shelter with multiple joined together. That's not included in this instance, as you can see. Below this, the back of the belt is quite heavily loaded. We have an item which had been dispensed with by the MVA, which is the bread bag. The MVA had initially introduced a bread bag for service in the 1950s. By this time that had been dispensed with, but the Kampfgruppen still using it, and as you can see here. A design like with the shovel going way back to pre-Great War in German use. So a long-lived part of German equipment and a nice thing to include from that point of view. On this we have a canteen clipped on and strapped onto the back of the bread bag. This is an early MVA example which again has been passed on to the Kampfgruppen when it's been replaced with more modern kit. And we have a mess tin on this side strapped on, again a fairly typical load, and this is a common thing to see again with German kit going way back, this method of carrying things on the back of the belt. The final thing to look at here is the left hand side of the mannequin, and we have the very distinctive Kampfgruppen insignia here on the arm. This is the second pattern of patch, which is closely associated with this pattern of uniform, with a red border, red flag attached to a rifle, and the hand raising that in the air. This is the standard Kampfgruppen insignia, as I say. Prior to this, a more full colour patch had been used on the earlier uniforms, but we have that more up-to-date insignia on this slightly later pattern of uniform, as I say, introduced in the 1970s. Mirror image otherwise, and we have the arm pocket here and the adjustable cuff there. One thing I didn't talk about on the other side is the elbow reinforcement on this particular pattern of uniform. You can see you have this elbow reinforcement patch on the back here, again in line with the combat uniform in use by the MVA at this time. That's a feature carried across. If I lift the arm out of the way, we can see the Soviet respirator haversack or gas mask bag underneath this. This of course contains the SCHM-41 gas mask or respirator, which is obviously a rubber face piece with a hose, which you carry the canister in the bag and then the hose reaches up to the face piece when you're wearing it. And in the pouch on the back here we have a decontamination kit carried as well. The 1968 version of the East German decontamination kit carried in the rear pouch here. So that's the respirator haversack carried round on the hip. This, as I say, is a Soviet design. These have been replaced in MVA service by East German designed, East German manufactured haversacks or gas mask bags, but the Kampfgruppen continued using this pattern at this time. So I hope you found it interesting looking at this. I certainly find the Kampfgruppen very interesting. There's not a huge amount of information out there on the Kampfgruppen. There is an interesting documentary available on YouTube, which I'll put a card up to in the corner of the video now. It's German language, but it does have subtitles, and that's well worth a watch. And it's, as I say, an interesting unit, an interesting paramilitary organisation in East Germany. And obviously being Eastern Bloc, the fact it was a socialist workers' militia is very interesting as well. It very much fits the ideology of East Germany in that regard. So that's a run through this kit and equipment. Not hugely detailed. It's not an area of expertise for me. I know enough to sort of make a video like this. If anyone wants to add further information in the comments, they'd be very welcome to do so. Please do. but I hope you found it interesting with this brief run over of the kit and equipment we have on the mannequin here. That's everything for this video. If you'd like to see more going forward, please do consider subscribing if you haven't already, and make sure you hit the little bell as well, the notification button. That will of course alert you when I upload future videos. But as I say, that is everything for this video, so until next time, bye for now.